Welcome to Art Alchemy, and as you can see, we haven't got Ruth in the studio today. We've got Mel Wardle Woodend, and she is, I'm just like, a doctoral researcher in poetry, which sounds absolutely fabulous. So we're really interested today in finding out a little bit about creativity from a different viewpoint, from the viewpoint of poetry. And you've had so much experience, so it's fabulous. You've been Staffordshire Poet Laureate. There's all sorts that we're going to hear about, but I'd like you to tell us about your journey from your viewpoint, possibly from when we first met.
Yes,
we've actually known each other through your journey, haven't we? And mine.
Quite a long time now, I think.
Yes.
In fact, I can't do the maths, but I think we met in 2007 at the Open University.
Yeah.
So, well, yeah, of course, I'll talk about how I got into what I'm doing now. But thank you, Debbie, for inviting me to Art Alchemy. It's really lovely to be here, and I hope you're going to enjoy what I'm going to talk about. But I guess for me, my creative journey probably started actually a long time before we did meet, because when I was a child, I was always scribbling. Even before I could properly write, I was scribbling emergent writing and making up stories and sort of saying them to my parents or my dog, making him listen, or anyone, that would listen. I was making
Oh, you've always had
and
pets.
saying them back. Yeah, always.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I've always really liked making things up and giving life to characters, I guess, and writing about what I can see around me. So I suppose that's how it started as a young child. And I've always really loved reading and books, and I'm very lucky that my parents encouraged my love of reading.
Mm-hmm.
They always took me to the library and let me browse in bookshops for ages and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I've always really enjoyed anything to do with reading and writing creatively. I left school at 13 because I didn't really fit in with the school environment. There was some bullying and things. And the doctor said, actually, you're not learning anything because you're refusing to go. So it's better to come out of school, just do the basic sort of 3 hours a week of maths, English and science based at home. And so I missed out, I think, on a lot of education. And that's what made me decide at the age of about 27, I think, that I really wanted to do a degree in English, because I've always loved English. And that's how we met, isn't it? Because we met at the Open University on the first module of a sort of a broad degree, because we both went off on different pathways but started on the same arts module. So that was fantastic, and just having my eyes opened really to all sorts of different art forms. But I particularly loved the poetry analysis of that first module, and that sort of led me on to really enjoying the literature and the language sections of the English degree. And when I finished my degree, I sort of thought, well, what should I do next? And I thought, I really want to, rather than study more of other people's writing, perhaps do my own. So I did a master's in creative writing, which was distance learning, but through Teesside University.
Can I just ask, so throughout your degree, because I did creative writing at Open University at the undergraduate. So did you do pure English all the way through? I didn't realise that. For some reason, I don't know why. I never thought about you not doing creative writing at undergraduate level.
Yeah, because I really wanted to study a mix of language and literature. And the thing about that degree, the Open University, you could do a joint English language and literature degree. So that was great. And it also made me fall in love with stylistics, which I'll come to much later.
All right, okay.
But
I don't know what stylistics is.
So stylistics is sort of the bridge between language and literature. So linguistics, where you're studying the way that literature is made of language and all of the different choices that the author makes when they're writing that influences the reader and how they might interpret the story or the poem or whatever the piece of writing is.
So is that like a voice as well, would you say? Because we talk about an artist's voice. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. Yes. It's interesting because there's so many correlations between the art and the writing. It is interesting to,
Definitely.
I love it when we get together.
Yeah, it's great. But we could be hours on this,
I know, it's fine.
It's cool. But the thing is, I realised that I really wanted to write more, and I was doing it as a hobby. So I was writing poetry in my spare time, and I was working as a teaching assistant first in a primary school and then in a high school, and I really enjoyed that. But I knew that actually what I wanted to do was writing. That's what my dream job had always been, and so a lot of different things happened. My husband and I got married, and that was a big life change. And then my dad died really suddenly, and that kind of, turned the world upside down, really. And it made me realise that it's one of those now or never things, where I was having a bit of success with the poetry I was writing, having it published in anthologies, and I put together my own ebook at that point. But I realised actually maybe I could do something more with the writing. So I said to my husband, just give me 3 months, let me leave my job, which was a bit crazy because obviously we both had a regular income at that point, and I was asking to leave my regular income behind and just see what happens. I said, if in 3 months I've not got anywhere, then I'll get another job. But
it's quite scary, isn't it, really, to do that? Yeah.
It was a big gamble, but I think everything was sort of leading up to that, and it felt like it was definitely the right thing to try. And I was very lucky, I think, because my mum persuaded me to enter a poetry competition, which was for the local Green Arts Festival, and that won an award. So I was invited to go on the radio, I was invited to go and read my poem at the awards ceremony, and that sort of got me into another branch of poetry. So I'd always just been somebody that writes, quietly on my own. Yes, putting it out into the world in an ebook and a paperback.
But you talk about
stand in front of people.
But performance poetry type thing. I don't know whether performance is the right word. But
I'd never come across it, really. Yes, I knew it existed, but it's never something I kind of realised was such a big community. I discovered this whole new world of poetry, which was in the performance side of it. Met a couple of other poets at the Green Arts Festival, and I was mesmerised by just watching them and listening to them and how they were on stage. And when it was my turn, I was terrified. I remember standing there, my knees, they were physically knocking. You hear the phrase, your knees are knocking. They actually were. And I thought, what if I can't speak? What if I say the wrong word? But as soon as I started, I loved it, and it's like an addiction. And it was just that one performance in front of people just made me realise how much you can engage with other people through the spoken word. And I started going to open mics, and I started organising open mics as well, and realised there was a massive community just in Staffordshire, but even further afield in other parts of the UK. I started travelling around a little bit and taking part in open mic nights in Worcester and even down in London at one point. And it's just opened up a new world.
Yeah. I came to a couple of the open nights, I think when you first started doing them. Where was it?
That's right, yeah.
I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
Little indie bookshop called Chapters of Stafford.
That first one that I came to, and I actually read something the one time.
You did,
I was
you read your own
terrified.
You were great, though.
Really terrified.
It was lovely, though, to have that sort of room full of people all there for the same reason, all enjoying each other's words.
It's really good. We really enjoyed it.
One of my friends had started up a poetry slam, which is poetry slam, for anyone that doesn't know. It's a competition where poets go up against each other, and there's like a little panel of judges, and it's all very light-hearted and fun, but it's a bit like It's a Knockout but with poetry, so you see who gets through to the last round and things. It's fun.
Great as an audience member to see it. It was brilliant.
Yeah, definitely, because you get all sorts of poets talking and saying poems on all different topics. But my friend, he only did it for a short time, and then he wanted someone to take over. So John Watkis, who is a filmmaker and he's a photographer and a creative person, he and I became friends, and we decided to carry on Word Stafford, as we ended up calling it. And it was poetry slam for quite a while, with an open mic section for people that didn't want to compete. So for anyone that thought, no, I don't want to be in the slightly more pressurized bit, you know, people could come and try out their new work, and it was a safe space. It was a function room in the Bird in Hand, so there weren't
That was
people
it.
sort of at the
That's
bar
where,
chatting. It was a
yeah.
lovely, quiet environment. And we did that right up until COVID pandemic. Of course, that shut everything down. But we were pretty quick to learn about Zoom and take our open mic online, and so we could still carry on, and it made people feel connected, I think, during a time when you couldn't socialise in person.
Yeah, and I think by then as well, I think around that time you were recognised for doing that, for actually reaching more people with the open word, weren't you? So
That's right.
because you became Staffordshire Poet Laureate
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Was it just before lockdown? I
It
was trying
was.
to remember.
October 2019 was when I'd applied as the previous Poet Laureate's tenure finished. So the position was advertised. It's an honorary position, and I applied for it. And I was really honoured to be given the role. And of course, yes, it was just before the pandemic. So I had lots of plans to go out into the community, to different villages and places to do poetry. And that had to all be adapted so that we could do it online instead. And it was wonderful. But obviously the pandemic was a terrible thing for so many people. But I think it also brought people together in the way that they could write about their experiences or write about something completely unconnected to the pandemic to take their minds off it. And it was just a really therapeutic thing for a lot of people to have that connection during such a time of uncertainty and worry.
Yeah, and it was a time of uncertainty, but I do feel like you did have some time on your hands as well to be able to explore some of the things that you perhaps hadn't. We definitely I did more painting outside once we were allowed. Do you remember we
Yeah.
weren't allowed to do anything but walk?
Yes.
And then when they allowed us to stop, I used to go sketching outside
that's great, yeah.
during that time. Yeah. So we've talked a bit about your journey, and I know it's not the whole journey, but I just wanted to point out that you have actually written quite a lot of books, and this is just the ones that I could put my hand on.
Thank you. You've got a real collection there. That's lovely.
I did. Well, at one point I was trying to buy every book, and then you started to write a lot, so I'm not convinced I've done every one. There's even one here. I think it's this one. So this one here, the Friendship Collection, I think it's got one of my poems in that
right.
one.
Yes, you contributed a poem to that.
Yeah.
That was the first sort of set of anthologies that I put together, and it was a way of, I don't know, connecting people again, but through books this time. And that's why it's called the Friendship Collection, because people would all sort of share the call out on social media, and it would be linked to friends of friends and things like that. And
Yes.
we donated a percentage of the income from that to Parkinson's charity.
I remember, yeah.
So yeah, that was a lovely project to do. But it was also the first that I did through my Dyslexia-Friendly publishing company. And the reason that I ended up getting into publishing is because when I was a teaching assistant in high school, I worked with lots of teenagers who had barriers to literacy, such as dyslexia and other sort of visual issues, or just being able to comprehend and take in huge blocks of text. And the way that books are usually presented, it is tiny fonts and huge chunks of text on a page, and it's really inaccessible for a lot of people, whether you have dyslexia or not. It can be very off-putting, I think. And I discovered a company called Barrington Stokes, who they're probably the main leading dyslexia-friendly publishers in the UK. And the way that they create their books, there's nothing simplified at all about the content. It's exactly as it should be, age appropriate. So it could be a novella for teenagers that's suitable for them. Whereas when we were trying to give children or young teenagers books to read, their reading ages were sort of age 7. And you couldn't be giving a 15-year-old boy a book about teddy bears or
No.
fairy princesses or something. It was awful. Yeah. So Barrington Stokes created these books that were age appropriate. Could be about football competitions or fighter pilots or whatever. and written in, using grown-up language, but just presented in a way that was more visually appealing, with smaller chunks of text, illustrations, wider spaces between lines, and very importantly, larger font, and not ever using black text on a white background, because that's very jarring. So I thought, well, if that company can do it, why can't I? Anyone could create books in that sort of format. So I decided to set up Dreamwell Writing, which is a dyslexia-friendly publishing company that I run. My ethos is to make books accessible for as many people as possible. That's it.
Yeah. I'm just looking. So, this is, I don't know whether, so these were the early ones. Oh, no, it's quite early because that's the friendship collection. So you did that quite a long time ago.
I think that was probably the end of 2017, I think. Came out then.
And I've also got, so this is like where you've edited for other people.
Yes.
As well. Yeah.
So, yes, I work with authors, it used to be just local authors, really, but now we've all learned about Zoom. It can be authors from anywhere, because you can sort of have meetings online. I publish for a lot of different genres now, really. So quite a lot of poets come to me with their collections, and also people, written crime novels, a recipe book, a sort of community-based recipe book is something that I've published, and all sorts, really. And again, the people that sort of come to me with their work are people that agree with that ethos, and they like what I do because they think books should be accessible as well. So I've had a few authors come to me who are dyslexic themselves, and they've wanted sort of help and support with the editing side, which is great because, I give that as well. And then having their books in a dyslexia-friendly format means they're really accessible.
Yeah, you've also worked quite a lot with the libraries, haven't you? So you do not just book signings, because I've gone to book signings when you've opened a new book, but other events with the library as well. Is there anything else that's notable? Or
I've worked a lot with Staffordshire libraries, and they're actually the people who are in charge of the laureate role. So Staffordshire is obviously the county, and it's the libraries that appoint the laureate. So
I didn't know that.
I've done a lot of lovely projects with them, including Pocket Film Festival, it was a look back at Stafford over the years, and looking at sort of the old industry and the way that everything sort of changed and developed. So I worked with some children at a middle school locally, and they came up with poems all about things in Stafford that their parents or their grandparents remembered. And I put on some workshops for them, looking at Victoria Park before, probably, I don't know, these or so, I would imagine. And also the way that we used to have a pageant that went through Stafford. So it was...
Oh, I remember the pageant. Footage. Yeah, do you remember it?
No, I don't. I didn't live in Stafford for my whole life. I was actually born in Worcester. And there was a lovely pageant in Worcester when I was a child in the 1980s. But the Stafford pageant was all sponsored by local companies like English Electric. And so there was some wonderful old footage that came out of the archives that the library gave me to use. And all these children came up with lovely poems. And we had an event at Stafford Library where the children could share their poems. And I invited a couple of local spoken word artists as well. Nick Dagg, who's from Stoke, and he talks a lot about the potteries, and a couple of others. And also I was commissioned to create a poem for that. But because it was a film festival, it was going to be a poetry film. So John and I worked together on that. And actually, we were very lucky because we wanted to go around Staffordshire and film lots of locations. And we literally did it about 2 or 3 weeks before the pandemic hit. So we were so lucky that we'd gone out and got all this footage of Stafford Castle, the Miners' Wheel at Cannock.
So you could work on it during the pandemic, even though you'd... So
it ended up that, we had lockdown, but John already had the material, and I'd already written the poem. So we could work at a distance through our computers and put it together.
That's amazing, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it was
just amazing.
It was a lovely project, and really good fun actually to make a film of a poem.
Have you got anything you want to share with us poetry-wise?
Yeah, of course.
About? Yeah.
So I'll share a poem. It's quite a light-hearted one. It's actually about my cat, who I had from a 9-week-old rescue kitten up until 18 and a half. She's lived a very, very long life. We only lost her very recently. But it's a poem that I wrote to obviously to sort of describe her and all about her and her personality, but one that I take into schools when I go and do workshops. And I work with children looking at the kind of poetry devices that are used and what effects they might have, so that they can, sort of be inspired to create their own poems. So this is called The Wise Cat. The wise cat has experienced life. She has age spots in her wisdom-filled yellow orb eyes. Whiskers of white and the odd white flecks here and there in her jet-black panther fur. But the wise cat is good at disguises. On a sunny windowsill, her glossy fur as black as the night shines with radiant striped reddish tones in the bright sunlight. She is a tigress, swaggery and sultry, thick tail swinging as she walks, or puffed up into a fluffy, tufty brush as she plays or stalks. The wise cat has velvet soft paws, silky and smooth. She keeps her sharp claws tucked away. Her sensitive pads are so gentle as she taps playfully at a toe until the midnight hour, when werewolf-like she transforms from soft, gentle pussycat. Blood is drawn with knife blade claws. But the wise cat means no harm. She's just doing what cats do, and if I were an elegant, graceful cat like she, full of wild, fierce beauty, I know I'd do it too.
I'm sorry. I've got a bit tearful there, and it's because I know that you've lost your wise cat.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, very recently.
Yeah, so that's the wise cat, and that's dedicated to Bubbles.
Yeah. Yes. And of course, you've talked about Bubbles loads and loads in your social media. So, we all know Bubbles, or it feels like we all know Bubbles.
Well,
anyway.
She's quite famous, really, because she was the reason behind one of the charity poetry anthologies that I put together, and it was to raise money for the Cats Protection in Stafford and Stone. And Bubbles' face is on the front cover of that anthology. Which has got lots of cat poems written by different people to raise money.
Yeah, it's fabulous. She has been very featured, and as are you. I mean, we'll come on to your other pets as well, but I think what was raised there was your interest in writing for children as well. Years ago, you were a teaching assistant, so you've obviously worked with children in the past, and you were talked about dyslexic children as teenagers as well. But I've got books here that you've written for children, so not only have you done poetry books, you've also written children's books as well, which are more like stories. Yeah, and I particularly thought that Little Brown Mouse was lovely because I've got them here actually. I've got the first Little Brown Mouse.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and then I've got and we will come on to this, Little Brown Mouse and the Silent World. Yeah, so I've got others as well, but I do like having the books, and I do because you do the illustrations, and the illustrations have changed over time, haven't they? You can see this is like Little Brown Mouse, the follow-on book, and I don't know whether you had a different illustrator, but initially your illustrations were sort of more just pencil drawings, weren't they? So,
and then they become more sketch-like. Well, it's the same illustrator, which is lovely because you get that continuity. But I think his style sort of evolves, and just like with writing, my writing style evolves. So I look at the first Tales of a Little Brown Mouse, which was written in 2018. And I look at the second one, which was written in 2024, and you can sort of see the way that the style, it's still my voice, still his illustrations, but the styles of ourselves sort of evolve a little bit.
It's quite nice that you've evolved together. Yeah, that is nice. I hadn't realised it was the same illustrator, so that is interesting.
Yeah, a wonderful young man called William Scarrett, his illustrator. I sort of gave him prompts really, and said, I really want the cat in it, and I needed that to be sort of based on Bubbles, and the mouse in my head, it's based on two things actually. When I was a little girl, I was about 7, and I was in hospital for about a week, and while I was ill, my dad used to come to the hospital and sit with me and make up stories and drawings about Robin Hood, because I was mad about Robin Hood and the Disney version. And he also made up stories about a little mouse because I had a pet mouse. So these sketches that my dad did of a little mouse when I was about 7, the mouse had a bow and arrow and he was quite a little tough character. And when I first got the idea for writing Tales of a Little Brown Mouse, it was when it was spring 2016 and I've been outside in the garden putting away my seedlings in the sort of greenhouse. And there was a scurrying sound. It was a very odd sound, and I wasn't sure what to think. And I sent my husband into the house to get a torch, and he came back, and we shone the light to try and find where this noise was coming from. And it was a tiny little mouse sitting up in the seed pot with, his big ears, and the torch light shone on his ears, and they were almost translucent. And I thought, I've got to write a story about this mouse.
Yes.
And so that's where that came from, really. But it was a story for children, and it was about friendship, essentially, and the way that people can be very different. They can look very different to each other. That the mouse befriends a grasshopper, and they end up saving each other from an evil snake, things like that. But it's all about friendship and how differences don't matter.
So your inspiration then does it come from how people relate, or have you got lots of inspiration from lots of different things?
I think I got a lot of inspiration from the world around me. So a lot from nature. So obviously the mouse was really a nature thing, but also on everybody's journey, you don't just get an idea because it's happening now. Everything from your past, I think, merges together, and everything you want from the future as well. And I think all of the things that make us who we are can merge into creativity.
Yes,
so
definitely.
My past experience, what I've said about the mouse that my dad drew, that became, there was a memory I'd probably largely forgotten, but it came into the forefront of my mind when I saw this little mouse and wanted to make a character for him. So I think, yes, it's about the people around us and about our own past experiences that can influence what we write, but also from things that you see around you now.
Yes. And I think also, I often say that people can look for clues because people wonder about who they are, what they want to, well, I'm talking about painting now, what they want to paint or whatever. Yeah. But it's often things that do reoccur as well, isn't it? Your inspiration can be things that reoccur.
Yes.
That are things that you were interested in earlier. So when I was in my 20s, I wrote quite a lot of poetry then.
Yeah.
And my poetry, when I look at it, was about nature's cycles and how they related to our own life cycles and things like seasonal inspirations and all sorts of things that now come into my artwork now. But I also, and that's partly the reason I was talking about, because you mentioned friendship.
Yeah.
And I also was quite interested in the relationship between, it's like us as part of nature, really, and how we relate to others, not necessarily just people, but other nature itself. So, it is quite interesting. It is interesting to see. And it's interesting to see how those patterns emerge as well in your work.
I think that's really interesting, what you've just said about nature. And when my dad died, I couldn't write for, I don't know, about 6 months or so. I just had mental block, because not that I was trying to write, I wasn't actually actively trying, but I just couldn't, I couldn't have imagined sitting down and trying to write something. My head was too jumbled. And all of a sudden, one spring day, walked home from being somewhere, and it was a typical April day where the weather is everything within about 10 minutes. And it had been sunny, and then all of a sudden the sky went black and it hailed. And I remember I'd got back inside just as it was about to hail, and sitting inside and seeing the hail hitting the window and having this idea for a poem that I had to write down that minute. I wrote it down. And when I read it back to myself, I realised it wasn't anything to do with the hail. It was about my dad's death. And so the way that nature, pathetic fallacy about weather affecting our moods, and the way that all of our senses can be affected by nature around us really fed into my work. And I started studying bibliotherapy then, and looking into the way that poetry is a therapeutic outlet, and it can be used for, grief sort of writing. It can be used for mental health, to make sure other people don't feel alone. And one of the things that means the most about my writing is if I do stand up and say a poem and somebody comes up to me afterwards and said that upset me because I could relate and that made me feel what I needed to feel, or that they saw so much of themselves in a poem, or somebody that they knew was in the poem. And I think the way that poetry can be, I mean, I could have written a poem about something and I knew in my head that's what it's meant to be about, but it can be interpreted in so many different ways and mean so much to different people.
Yes, yeah. And that's what you find with the art as well. So the more you put yourself into it, the more people relate. But I say people, not everyone relates, because it depends on, but then they can see something completely different in the art. But the emotion and the fact that it's more authentic is picked up by people.
Yeah.
And that sometimes means that they don't like it as well.
Definitely.
It means, yeah. So they either connect or they don't.
But I think that's a good thing as well, because even if someone really doesn't like something, that's an emotion.
Yes,
so it's affected them and it's made them feel something, whatever that feeling is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I thought I'd share a poem, if that's okay, that sort of relates to what I was just talking about with grief, writing about somebody that's no longer here, but using nature to inspire you. And I sort of developed an understanding of synesthesia and the way that all the senses can be affected by colour. So this poem is sort of a poem all about different colours and the way they make you feel. And I wrote it about my dad, which I found a real comfort. So it's in Natural Colours that was published in 2017.
Oh, I've got it here.
Oh, you've got it as well. Thank you.
I've got it here.
It's called You Are. You are the red of sunset burning in the sky, brown Canada geese migrating, calling as they fly. You are the cheerful face of the yellow daffodil bobbing in the breeze, the shiny white ice lingering on a woven web, frozen in the winter freeze. You are the grey taste of tears fresh from my eyes, but the rainbow of reasons why I should embrace life. You are the teacher who taught me all I know, and half of the people into whom I've proudly grown. You are the power of the deep blue sea as white surf crashes on the shore. The wild purple heather blowing, straggly but surviving upon a dark green moor. You are the warm familiar scent of a green geranium leaf, the brown-eyed memory still comforting in grief. You are the joy of endless yellow summer days, of deep blue rocks and spuddling in a sandy, sunny haze. You are the pink blossoms of spring and the fiery orange of an autumn tree, the red blood and the inspiration flowing through me. You are the clear, clean rain refreshing on a sultry summer's day, the cosy chrysalism feeling, chasing the winter blues away. You are always, you just are, and I know that you'll never be too far.
Good.
Thanks. Yeah. I found it a real comfort to write that, and I really enjoy reading that because it's my dad, really. It's all of his personality captured,
but in a lovely way, sort of in a uplifting type way. Yeah, that's how it feels. Yeah. So I think we've always connected, haven't we? I think we've connected. Yeah. It's so out of all the people that we knew in Open University, because the way it works is you start off together, but then you do all different courses. We stayed in touch, didn't we?
And we did. I think we used to go, didn't we, to the pub? So as proper students, we used to go to a tutorial every 2 weeks, I think it was. And
it was quite regular.
Because obviously, well, for anyone who knows what the Open University is, they'll know it's a distance learning facility. But we were lucky to get those face-to-face tutorials in the first year, and they were really regular. So we used to go off to the pub after, didn't we, and put the world to rights.
We did. I think that was that the Bird in Hand as well?
I'm not sure where we went, actually.
I can't remember.
A variety of places.
Yeah.
But we've always kept in touch, and it's been great because we've both followed really creative paths and in different ways, because you were doing lots of music and composing, and then obviously now your art and the way that you lead all of the art workshops, and you've got a big exhibition coming up soon and things. So we both followed creative paths, which is lovely. Yeah,
and I'm wanting to incorporate more of my poetry more into the art, but you can't actually tell, probably even from here, you can start to see that I've got like the ischemic writing in there, or little bits where I know I tend to write underneath my paintings. So
Okay.
and often with a poem in mind. So I know what's in there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's just because what I'm trying to do is instead of like having an end result in mind of what I want, I try and be led by the inspiration and how I'm feeling,
Yeah.
and then let the painting unfold, really. So I do have ideas of what I want to go in there, and that's why I put things like the writing underneath and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I did do a series of like a sketchbook where I'd actually got pieces of poetry just collaged in, and I'd like to do that on a big scale as well. It's just I haven't quite worked out the logistics
That
of
sounds
how.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I will get there. It's just, but I've started to do it. I've started to write on all of my, not all, but most of my art's got writing in it.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's brilliant. And of course, you can do ekphrastic poetry. So you could, take a piece of artwork and, well, it could be your own artwork or somebody else's, and then use that as a prompt to inspire a poem.
yes. So do it the other way round, which
Yeah.
is like,
Yeah.
yeah. But I quite often, or I might sometimes we'll use a piece of music, and
Okay.
so that's different again. But
Yeah. Yeah.
the sound as well going into the art, because when I first started, it was all very visual, and I wanted to be able to, during lockdown, I would go out, and it was during that time that I actually could produce a painting from what I could see in front of me.
Yeah.
Outside. It was great. That was great. But that's not what I want to do anymore. It's
Yeah.
like I would like to also incorporate what's going on around me as well. So there's all of the senses. Actually, I think I'm wondering whether this is bringing us quite nicely onto what's happening with your senses. I know that we still got more to do because Mel's come even further in her career. So she's actually now at Birmingham University, and so there's lots more to discuss on that front. But I think that it's sort of what we've been talking about nicely leads us on to what's happening
With my hearing. Yes. When I was Poet Laureate, I was lucky that because of the pandemic sort of interfering with the plans at the beginning, the library offered me a third year. So they extended my laureateship for a year, which was brilliant. It meant I could get on with lots of extra projects. But in that third year, I woke up one morning, having gone to bed completely fine the night before, and I sat up in bed and I said to my husband, I can't hear in my left ear. And I'd gone to sleep and I'd woken up with something called sudden sensorineural hearing loss, which is where your hearing can just literally switch off. It's fairly rare, but more common than people realise. And I've sort of like got a really good support network now of other people that it's happened to. But at the time, of course, you don't know what's happening. All I knew was that I couldn't hear, but instead my hearing had been replaced with this roaring sound, which is like a train rushing past when you're standing on a station platform and you've got one of those fast trains that isn't stopping. So that was quite scary, but I thought maybe I've got a cold or something, or my ear's just a bit bunged up with catarrh or something. It would be fine in a couple of days. I left it a couple of days and my friend said, no, you need to go to the doctors in case it's a serious problem. And I went to the doctors and they said, no, that's fine. It's just take some nasal spray and come back in 2 weeks if it hasn't cleared up. They said, you must have had a virus. And I was, convinced I haven't had a virus. I was perfectly all right.
Yeah.
They sent me on my way. 2 weeks later, it was Christmas. So I couldn't go back to the doctors because everything was closed. And I was really starting to get quite worried at this point. I couldn't hear throughout all of Christmas. And on the first day of the new year, when places were open, I actually went to a hearing test, private hearing test place, and they tested my hearing. And the man's face, when he'd finished, was quite frightening because he said, this is a serious medical emergency. You should have been put on steroids straight away by the GP because you've lost 60 decibels worth of hearing, and that is a medical emergency. And I didn't know anything about hearing at that point, apart from that mine had always been fine.
No.
So I was given steroids that day. I was booked in for an urgent MRI scan to see why this had happened. The worst case scenario, it could be a tumour on the auditory nerve. And it was quite frightening, you know. And along with worrying about what the cause was and whether it could be okay again, it was also the impacts of dealing with the actual change, because all of a sudden I found I wasn't safe, you know, walking down the road. I couldn't hear people coming behind me, and it knocked all my confidence. It was really frightening time. And anyway, the months went on and the hearing transferred into my other ear as well, and I started to get vertigo. So I ended up being diagnosed with something called Meniere's disease, which means your hearing drops, and you can get vertigo as well as a symptom. It's a vestibular disorder, which is quite common, but my hearing wasn't going to come back. So I knew there was only a very, very slim chance that taking a course of steroids would make my hearing come back, and it didn't. So throughout all this time, my friend John, that I used to run the poetry Word Stafford with, he's actually deaf and blind, so he knew a lot about what I was going through. He was sort of saying, "Come for a coffee," making me go out and be in the outside world when I felt like hiding away. He was a real rock throughout all of that. Came to hospital appointments. He said, "Why don't you see about trying a lip reading course?" So I like to be proactive rather than just, sitting back and wondering what's going to happen. So I looked online and found a lip reading course to join, and it was brilliant. So I started a lip reading course, and in the meantime, I was waiting to be fitted with hearing aids through the NHS, which I then was given, and that, helped, but it's not a cure. So it's not like when you wear glasses and you put your glasses on, you can see really clearly because the prescription fixes your eyesight with the glasses on. Hearing aids can't do that. They can only sort of help to amplify what's left of the hearing. So they can't replace the nerves that are damaged, and you lose various sort of vowels and consonants depending on the frequency and the pitch of the hearing loss. So all it can do is really amplify what you've got. And so it's not a cure. And people think, oh, you've got hearing aids, you can hear again. No, actually, it's really difficult. But with the lip reading as well, that helped. And while I was at the lip reading course, the instructor said, why don't you apply for a hearing dog? And I'd never heard of hearing dogs at that point. It's Hearing Dogs for Deaf People are a charity. They're actually the second biggest assistance dog charity in the UK, second only to guide dogs. And they've been running since 1982. And they train dogs to be able to alert their deaf owners to sounds they would miss otherwise. So things like the alarm clock and the cooker timer and the telephone, but most importantly, the smoke alarm. So it's amazing, it's amazing the way that dogs can be trained to do these things. And not only do they do this practical assistance work, but they're also the companion as well. So they bring you comfort and confidence. And
you get matched with the dog right from
that's right.
When she's young. So you. I mean, I remember Kiri arriving, and it's just amazing. Yeah.
I was really lucky that they looked at my application. They said, yes, definitely you're eligible for a sound support dog. There's 3 different tiers. There's a hearing dog, sound support dog, and then confidence and companion dog that they train. So I went down to Buckinghamshire, which is where their headquarters is, and had an assessment day where they found out all about me and my needs and the things I would need from a dog. So one of the things was, because I'd just applied for a PhD at Aston University. As I lost my hearing, I was literally in the middle of applying for that. And I started there. So one of the things I really needed was a dog whose confidence come on the train with me and be in a busy station. So I knew they'd look out for a dog who was confident enough to do that kind of thing with me and would come to university and be with me in my office. So if a fire alarm went off, they would be able to alert me, because that had actually happened the previous summer where I'd been in uni and the fire alarm had gone off and I didn't know. Yes. So that was, things like that are quite scary. And
Yes,
so
and I think that because you've talked to me about this a little bit before, and I think that what people don't realise, it's things like if you're waiting for a train and somebody comes up behind you and bumps into you, you don't know they're there. There's
no,
like, you hear things without realising what your hearing does. It gives you an awareness of your
yeah,
surroundings that you haven't got, and that's something that Kiri can help tremendously with, because that is it's hard to realise when you have got hearing what your hearing does in those
yeah,
situations, isn't it?
it
I
definitely
think,
is. And even things like my husband, obviously he's known me for 20 years as a hearing
yeah,
person, and all of a
yes,
sudden he can't call to me from the other room and expect me to hear, because I
mm,
don't. So
mm,
he's saying things to me and I'm not replying, or even if he's got his back to me and he's looking out the window saying something. It's a
mm,
learning curve for everybody around, I think,
mm.
around the person who loses the hearing. So I was delighted that Hearing Dogs put me on the waiting list. And a few months later, it was actually on National Poetry Day, so it made it extra special. I got an email saying that I'd been matched with a dog. And the types of dog that hearing dogs train, they train Labradors and Cocker Spaniels, Cockapoos, and miniature poodles. And really, it's not like guide dogs where they need a big dog to be, big and visual and lead the way and match somebody's pace so they can walk fast. It doesn't matter what size a hearing dog is. It's all about the personality and what they're confident to do. And the 4 breeds that they train are really trainable and adaptable into family life and things.
Yes.
And my email said I've been matched with a little black miniature poodle called Kiri. And so if I was interested, we'd have a Zoom and I'd learn more about her. I'm like, yes, of course I'm interested. Yes, please. So we had a Zoom. I found out more about Kiri. I said, yes, I definitely want her. And then I had to wait a month while I did some extra training with hearing dogs for Kiri to then come to me, because she completed her training by this point. She was a fully qualified sound support dog.
But you had to
I
be
had to be
trained.
trained. Yeah.
Can we meet her? Is she
Yes.
there?
Kiri.
Yeah.
I might need to bribe her with treats because she's asleep. Ready? Up. Jump up. Ready? Money. Good girl.
Oh.
So this is Kiri, who's very curly at the moment. Say hi.
Hello, Kiri.
Good
Hello,
girl.
darling.
She was just
Yeah.
asleep. But she's amazing. And the day that she arrived, she changed my life straight away, because all of a sudden I've got this dog that I'm responsible for. So no matter how bad I'm feeling, I can't just, hide away. I've got to take this dog out. She'll need a walk. She'll need taking care of. She needs to go outside and get fresh air and go to the toilet outside. And all of a sudden, I've got this dog walking next to me. So I feel safer because, a dog walking next to you, people aren't going to bump into you. They go round. And even if they don't go round, the dog, his body language changes. And I know that there's something happening. So suddenly I get my confidence back. And it's also the most sociable thing in the world, I think, having a dog, because every time you go outside, people come up to you, when you're walking past other people with dogs, you say hello. People ask me questions about her, and she's just fantastic. And her sound work is amazing. So it means I've been able to go away by myself and feel completely safe in a hotel room, because it doesn't matter if I haven't got my hearing aids in and I don't hear a fire alarm, because Kiri will hear it and she will alert me. And I won't be late for breakfast because she will wake me up at the right time with the alarm clock. And
Yes.
so, yeah, I've got my independence back and I've got my best friend at the same time.
And she goes to work with you.
Yeah.
So she helps you at work as well. It's not just like, so you do lecturing because you're doing your PhD, you do
Yeah. So
lecturing.
generally at uni, Kiri comes and sits in my office because it's a quiet place, because I'm a PhD researcher. We do get like a much quieter office than if I was an undergraduate going to lectures. So if there's anything that's not suitable for Kiri, like if I was going to lecture and it's a big class or anything like that, then Kiri will sit in the office with one of my colleagues and they'll look after her so she isn't doing anything that will make her feel overwhelmed. But yeah, she supports me on the bus, the train, walking down to the campus. Got lovely green space at Aston with Canada geese and some ponds and things. So it's nice for her to have like a good sniff round when we get there. And of course, everybody at uni adores her and she adores them.
Yes.
So she loves coming with me, and they've even got her a little basket for our office. So she's got her own bed there.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And it's great that she just gives you that ability to go without, I mean, you were doing it before, weren't you? But it just gives you that extra confidence of knowing you're going, well, feeling safe, really.
Yeah.
I think the second, where is it? The sequel to Little Brown Mouse, there it is. So this sequel is a story for children, and it's wonderful because it sort of goes through all of those things.
Yes.
And I don't think it's just a story for children. I mean, it's quite a quick story for adults, but I do think it's a lovely story that really puts you in the position of someone who's suddenly lost their hearing, I think, and the friendships and having to explain to people how they can help as well. Yes.
I think I wanted it to be something that could be enjoyed just as a story, if that's, how it came across to people, but also as a teaching aid, so that people can, if they know anybody that's had sudden hearing loss, maybe there's a child in a class that's got hearing loss, and it could be used to help the other children to understand what they can do to help. Yes, the story starts with Mouse being in his garden, which is the same sort of setting as the first book. But one day he wakes up and nothing is the same because he can't hear. He can see the wind blowing the trees, and he knows that it's a blustery day because he can feel his fur being ruffled and things like that. But he can't hear, and he knows that he should be able to hear the wind and the bell and the cat that lives in the garden. He has that sudden change and the journey of coming to terms with his hearing loss. At first he hides away in his nest, but then he comes out and he's trying to interact with the other animals in the garden just like he always had, but some of the animals are too fast. So I think the hedgehog is the worst one. I think she speaks really fast and scurries off before he's had chance to ask her again what she said. And the story sort of is all about how eventually the slowest animal, which is the snail, comes up to him, and Mouse has got really disheartened by this point because the animals are all too busy doing their own thing, too fast. A twig fell off a tree and hit him on the head before he realised what was going on, because one of the animals had shouted a warning but he hadn't heard. And Snail comes along the wall and he speaks really slowly and looks at the mouse, and they kind of work out together that what is happening is Mouse needs to look at the person speaking and to be able to lip read as well. So Snail goes off, and he's like the smallest one in the garden, but he goes off, speaks to all the other animals and explains what Mouse needs. And all of the other animals then help by the blackbird flies around to be in front of Mouse when he's talking, so Mouse can see him. And the hedgehog learns how to speak a bit slower and a bit clearer. And so they all work together so that Mouse can be included again. And I think that's what I wanted, really. It was my journey to be told through an animal so that it's not, prescriptive, like a grown-up saying what you need to do, but in a way that can make children think for themselves about the best way to help a friend or a classmate or a family member who's lost their hearing. And one of the lovely things about it is that after I'd written it, there was a review on Amazon, and the person said they'd read it to their child, and he loved it because he said that Mouse was just like him. A little child with hearing loss could relate to the character. So I know that book is out there doing its job because it's helping people, and that's what I want from my writing.
Yeah, no, it's really good. It's really lovely. And I got George read it too. It was like, I read it and I was like, you've got to read this book. It's just lovely. Thanks. And it really does explain. It makes you think, actually, because it's I think when you look at somebody who has got hearing loss, and like people are watching this podcast and we're just talking, aren't we? It doesn't appear like there's any issues really, but actually, your hearing loss is Well, it's significant, isn't it? Like you say, if you didn't have your hearing aids in, you wouldn't hear a fire alarm. You wouldn't hear the doorbell. And that's what it's difficult to, it's because people can't see that. They don't necessarily understand. Yeah. Yeah. So I thought it explained it really well. I thought it was really good.
Thank you.
That was,
I loved writing
well,
it as well. You know, it's fun when you're writing from the points of view of animal characters, and they really come alive. So from a writer's point of view, I really, really love writing about animals. And I wrote another book, which is actually main aimed at adults, called Tabitha. And that's about a little cat.
Right, I haven't read that one. Yeah.
It's sort of about age-related illnesses like dementia. And it's all about what happens to a little cat when her elderly owners have issues. So again, I was determined. I'm determined at some point I'll write a book that isn't from an animal's perspective, but the way that it seems to work out, it is at the minute.
And that's fine.
I think it's another way to reach people, I think.
Yeah, and you did poetry for children as well at some point, I'm sure. Yeah, I seem to remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of poetry collections. What Am I? An Alphabet of Animal Poems, which is for young children. And that's where in the poem an animal is describing itself, and the children have to use clues. So they use their clues about, all the senses again, what colour the animal is, what it sounds like, what it feels like if you touch it, and their knowledge that they're developing of the animal world. So things like, I live in a sty. Young children that are maybe 4 or 5 are learning that pigs live on farms in a pigsty. So it helps them to guess using all of those clues. And a few of them you can put actions to as well. So I did used to go to schools quite a lot and work with young children. So it's really like a speaking and listening sort of interactive session with a bit of writing as a group for the younger ones, and then older children in primary school developing their own writing, and sort of tailor the workshops to be more sort of fun, maybe animal based for the young ones, and then things like mental health and the environment for the older children.
Yeah, it's really, really good, really interesting. And I think it's great how, if you think about it, even your experience as a teaching assistant and where I first knew you has all come into all of that as well, hasn't it? Yeah. So I think now, Mel, it would be great to see where your journey is now, how life is now, your creativity, what you're doing now, and where we're at really. That would be
Well, obviously we've come out of the pandemic, I guess, as much as we're probably going to. And one of the nice things that I forgot to mention during that time was my little guinea pig, Scruffy. He and we did a thing called a poem a day, which was just a little Facebook video of me reading a poem and Scruffy weeking away, being cuddled. And that was really to cheer people up through the pandemic. And I didn't get one, but somebody nominated my guinea pig, and he received a Blue Peter Award through the post for all of his.
Know that. I don't know why I didn't know that. I was following it.
For all of his hard work. So that was really lovely. And again, it made me realise how much I can connect with people. So as my laureateship drew to a close, I realised I wanted to take my poetry further in a different way. And because I really enjoyed studying at sort of undergraduate and master's level, and I knew that I wanted to further my research in poetry, I applied to Aston to do a PhD. And I'm looking at the relationship between eco-poetry and the awareness that it raises of the environmental issues going on in the world. But not only that, the way that performance can add another element to that awareness. So it's sort of the comparison really of a page and stage eco-poetry and its effects on people in the real world. So I was really, really lucky that my supervisor is also a poet. So between us, we set up Aston Society of Poetry. So that's a really nice little... monthly kind of get together where anyone, whether they're a student or a staff member at the uni, or even you don't have to go to Aston, you might just live locally in Birmingham and want to come along. People meet up and chat. It can be about poems that you've enjoyed on YouTube, or something that you've read, or something you've written yourself. And again, it's a nice safe space for people to be able to just talk about creativity and enjoy words. So that's really lovely, because there's a nice community at Aston, I think, of people who are interested in the arts and in poetry. And my research it kind of evolves. So when I first started, I had a really specific idea of exactly what I wanted my PhD to do. And as I've studied and learnt more, the research itself evolves a little bit. And so I've been really lucky, because I've been to a couple of conferences where I've presented my work and the research that I've done so far into eco poetry. And I've just started my third year now. So I'm about to start doing focus reading groups, which is where members of the public can meet with me on Teams, and we'll look at some eco poems together, and then I'll sort of analyse their discussion on how the poems made them feel and what, different elements of the poem. So I'm sort of looking at the difference between the page when you're reading it for yourself and the stage when you're watching a performance.
The stage, yeah.
The way that can, influence all of the senses. And so it's really fascinating, and I'm really enjoying that and learning a lot as well.
Is it 4 years?
Yeah, so it's usually 3 years, but you can have a fourth year if you need it as well. And I've sort of done a mix of full-time and part-time, so I've probably got another 2 years left, physical years. Yeah. It's something that I think is really important, because poetry, as we've said, poetry can be a vehicle for therapy, and it can be a way of making people feel less alone, but it can also be a vehicle for communicating important issues in a way that is more accessible than if you sat down to read a scientific report or something on climate change. It wouldn't mean anything, it doesn't go in. But poetry is accessible, and it can make people think and feel. So that's why it's such a powerful vehicle for making people aware of environmental issues, really.
And what are you finding between the stage and the page? What are you have you got any findings so far?
So I'm looking at different theories that have already been sort of created about the way that when you read a poem on the page, it's something called a split discourse world, where you are not in the same place as the author. So you can only take their meanings from the words and the choices that they've made. And I mentioned earlier about stylistics, those sort of style choices that make you interpret a poem a certain way. So you're not in front of the poet. You can't see their face. You can't see what their emotions are. You get everything from the words in the page. But whereas when you're watching a performance, the poet is there in front of you, and you see all that emotion. You see the energy that they're kind of using. You can see how their performance incorporates all the senses, and meaning can come across differently, I think. So you've got the words as well, because obviously the poet is speaking the words, but you've got this whole extra layer of meaning. And so what I'm trying to develop in my PhD is a framework to analyse that extra layer of meaning that comes from gesture and performance. And so
that is very interesting. I was trying to think of how that relates to art, because it's like, it really is, because a lot of the time you want to actually say what your art's about, but then, you do need to have that story to give it meaning, but also you want people to interpret it themselves. And I wonder whether there's an element of similarity there or not. And I'm not quite sure, to be honest.
Well, I think so, because poetry is an art form, and yes, you might have a poet that stands up at the beginning and says, this poem is about blah, 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 and they give you that sort of paratext at the start.
Yeah.
But then you get some poets that will stand up and just say, this poem is called, and then they won't tell you what it's about, but you get everything from, listening and watching and hearing the words. And so yeah, I think, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, to compare whether
It is
you're
interesting to
trying to
compare.
tell people this is what it's about, so you'd think that you're going to take it in that way. But even if someone says that, you can still take it in the way that it comes across to you, I think, to the reader.
Mm.
But that hopefully what my findings when I finished will enable is for other people to be able to then analyse performance in using the framework that I've developed or I'm developing, and they'll be able to then apply it to any text, any poem, whether it's about the
Mm.
environment or something else. It doesn't matter. It will be a
Mm.
framework that everybody can use to research, and hopefully my PhD thesis will eventually be published in a book. That's the intention is that I'll hopefully do that, and hopefully it's another way of people learning more about the environment. And there's a sort of a branch of stylistics called eco stylistics, which I'm working in as well, where it's all about how an eco poem is the relationship between people and the earth. So whether it's sort of something where people are planting lots of trees or whatever, so that's a good relationship, or whether it's all about carbon burning and the California wildfires, anything like that, where we're having a negative impact on the environment. All of those are really important to be an eco poem, so people can understand what the human relationship with the earth is.
So, as well as your PhD work, does
Yeah,
that run alongside your books? Do you still write? And
yeah,
are your books, so I'm just trying to see the relationship between them. Are your books related to eco as well? Or do you understand what I mean?
yeah. So some of my books are very much to do with eco poetry because I've published collections for There Is No Planet B Stafford Green Arts Festival.
Yes,
So those
yes.
anthologies that showcase the work of local and further afield people who've written poems about the environment. And those books are sold to raise money to keep being able to put on Stafford Green Arts Festival, which is it's a sort of collaboration really, because it's got poems and poets, it's got art made from recycled materials, and it's got as many elements as you can think of really. There's dancing, all sorts that are used to make people think about the environment. So that I think that's definitely the way that I think that's how my interest in eco poetry sort of stems from, that very first poem that I wrote and submitted to There Is No Planet B Green Arts Festival, which won the award and got me into performance poetry. So, as part of my early bit of my PhD, I analysed my own poem, which was really quite fun and interesting as well. And now I'm in the process of creating a small pamphlet, really, of eco poems that I've written. They're going to be illustrated by Susan Wood, who is a fantastic illustrator I've worked with on lots of the collections that I've put together. So that's kind of in the pipeline, but a bit slow. And then I've got another couple of books on the go, and it's due out very, very soon. A Hearing Dogs anthology. So it's called 100 Poems for Hearing Dogs. And the idea is that people have written poems about dogs, and I've edited and collated into an anthology, and that will raise money to go to Hearing Dogs charity, because I think, I want to give something back. They've given me the most wonderful gift of Kiri, and I think it's really
Yeah.
important to give something back to that charity. So I suppose my, again, current project, I would say it's not quite finished, but this is a proof copy published by Clayhanger Press. This is called the Laureate Collection, and it's a way of making a permanent record, really, of all the commissions I did throughout my laureateship. So it's a little bit like a journey, like we've talked about a lot about the creative journey
Yes.
today, and it's really about my journey through being Staffordshire Poet Laureate. It's got sections about lockdown. It's got an eco poetry and nature section. It's got a section about family, because I think that's a really important influence on my writing. And then it's got the final part of the book it's called Part 6, A Different Way, and that's all about when my hearing loss happened. So there's a few poems in there about hearing loss as well. And although they weren't commissions when I was laureate, I think they're really important to include as part of the journey.
Yeah, It's fabulous. I think that your journey is amazing.
Do you want me to read a final poem? Because I've got
Absolutely, yeah.
one. You can cut anything out that you don't want to have. I've got one about sounds, which is a bit fun, and I've also got one about Kiri.
No, but read both, yeah. That'll be
Okay.
lovely. Yeah, so read us a couple of poems to finish off. And then obviously I'll put all the details for contacting you, but also any books that you feel that you'd like to just let people know about. Yeah?
Thank you. So I'm just going to read a couple of poems from the Laureate collection, and these are to do with hearing loss. So there's some fairly serious ones about hearing loss in the book, but I'm just going to read a light-hearted one and then one that's really special to me. So this is Sounds. If you can remember the growl of Sunday morning lawnmowers, climbing creaking apple trees, next door's poodle yapping fiercely from behind the fence, flapping tent fabric and shrill whistling wind on a cliff-top campsite, the percussion of cracking china, plates banging together in an outdoor sink, hands splashing in warm soapy water, the sea roaring in your ears. The bark of your dog, deep and gruff, his tail sweeping cups off coffee tables in his excitement to get to a knock at the door. And you remember your friend's mum telling you off after a too rough game of cowboys. Cherryade tumbling into glasses, signalling no hard feelings, and gulping it down, fizzing hot and red in the summer sun. Then sounds are never really lost. If you can remember your grandpa's pom-pom-pom pottering around the garden with you bouncing high upon his shoulders to the rhythm of his hum, and grandma's stern teacher voice speaking softly on your first visit without parents. Your dad shouting, "Turn your auxiliaries off," down your first brick-shaped mobile phone when you're having trouble with the alternator on your first car. And you remember his voice as clearly now as if he spoke only yesterday, because sounds are never really lost. You will remember, too, the sounds that now are fading. A small boy's voice, a cat's purr, a guinea pig's rumble, a husband's mumble, and a mum's steady voice. Laughter of friends, and bass notes in all your favourite songs. And a poem spoken aloud. I guess that's, sounds and memories of sounds, really. I think once you've got a memory, it doesn't matter if that sound then disappears because you've always got it in your mind.
Yes. Yeah.
And this poem, I've just called it Kiri, and it's a poem that I wrote just before she arrived while I was waiting for her, and that wait seemed like forever, but it's how I knew she'd make me feel when she arrived. Kiri. Sometimes I don't know how to navigate forward. Paddling side to side is the only way to float out of a riptide. Head back, ears submerged, stay calm, survival technique, yet exhaustion takes over, drowning in fluid. Pressure builds incoherence, a dead weight sinking down and down, almost drowning. But a distant light moves towards me, glows brighter, closer day by day. And if I can stay afloat a little longer, she will reach me, steady me, show me the future. Build up my trust, be my ears, friend and companion, showing me a way forward that we can take together. And I don't know if you can see, but the poem is quite long and thin. And it's written in a form of a choker poem, which is a sort of ancient Japanese form where you do 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5, which is a bit like a haiku, but then it goes on and on and on. And it was like I say, an ancient Japanese form that was used to tell stories. So it could be very, very long, like an epic. And then you end it with 2 lines of 7 syllables at the end. So the reason that I wanted to choose that form to write that poem is because of how restricted and constricted I felt at the time. So I wanted it to be kind of tight on the page to show that.
Yeah, I get that.
But also,
I really get it.
I think, just when we've been talking about creativity, it's nice to sort of think how different poetry forms can be chosen because they represent something.
And also, I don't know whether it's the same for you, by having a restricting form, it enhances creativity sometimes, doesn't it? It's a little bit like if you limit your palette, it helps you to just think of the creative bit. It sort of does that.
Yeah, it takes a lot of choice away, doesn't it? So
takes the choices away. So So
work with
yeah,
what
yeah,
you've
it
got.
becomes, and ironically, you become more creative with it. It's like ever so strange, but there is something in that.
Yeah,
So
definitely. I think it's good to challenge yourself as well sometimes, isn't it? And,
it is.
take yourself out of your comfort zone. You could just write free verse, or you could try a different form and see what happens. And like you say, it inspires you to really think and be creative.
It
Yeah, I just
really
thought I'd share that
does.
poem about Kiri because that's how I knew she'd make me feel.
She's wonderful, isn't she?
Thank
I
you.
mean,
Yeah, she is. She's amazing.
she couldn't, yeah. We've been out together
Yeah.
and yeah, yeah. And she did even do the nudging thing that she does with you
Yes.
to me.
Yeah,
And
she
that
did,
was
didn't
almost like accepted. I'm accepted. So that's good. I can't thank you enough for coming in and doing this podcast because it's been absolutely wonderful. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add or...
I think we've covered all the things that I can think of, really. And, just want to say thank you very much for having me. It's been really lovely to be on the Art Alchemy podcast. I hope it does brilliantly because I know it's quite a new method that you're using, really, to get art out into the world. We talked about the different journeys, and obviously traditional painting is a way of people visually look at art. But I think using a podcast is a really fabulous technique as well, because it inspires people to think differently and discover all sorts of art forms as well. You've covered photography on another.
Yeah, and it's definitely it's not just about art, it is about creativity and about how to find your inspiration and all sorts of things that we're covering. But we also have a big thing about the fact that we believe that art's really good for your well-being, and that is not just visual art that we're talking about. So, and that's where me and you really also agree on that
definitely.
side of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been fantastic having you here, and you have to come back and let us know how the PhD has gone.
Yes, definitely. I'd love to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give me a couple of years to get my research
to actually get yes, but that would be really interesting to hear about. So thank you and good luck with your laureate collection and any other books that you've got out at the moment.
Well, thank you for all your support as well.
Yeah, and thank you. And to all of you watching, thanks for watching, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.